Hello everyone, welcome to Easy Economics. How are you all doing? I hope you all are doing good. Today I brought for you all October-November 2025 0455 variant 21. We're already done with section A of this variant. Today we'll be looking at questions from section B. So let's see what this paper has brought for us today. Question number 2. We'll read the stimulus and then we'll solve together the corresponding questions. Question number 2. In the first half of 2022, Guyana's GDP grew by 36.4%. Most of this growth was due to higher output in the primary sector. So that means the primary sector was the one that contributed most to Guyana's growth. And how much did it accounted for? 36.4% of the GDP grew. The government used some of the tax revenue that was generated from this growth to fund long-term development projects such as infrastructure and education. However, in the short run, there was a rise in house prices. So now whatever money was generated, the government utilized it in order to finance certain infrastructure projects and in order to provide education. However, it was also seen that the prices of houses rose in 2022. All right. Now, the first part is identify two examples of primary sector industries. So now you just go to listing them down. So any two primary sector industries could be fishery, it could be farming, could be forestry or forest and mining. You can pick any two of these, write them down and you'll get straight 2 marks. So this is what you are supposed to do in part A. Part B, explain two causes of rising GDP. Now, it's a 4-mark question. Now we know how the marks for this part are allocated is 1 mark is for the identification of the first reason. Explanation of that reason will give you the 2nd mark. The 3rd mark you'll get for identification of the 2nd reason, and for the explanation of the 2nd reason you'll get the final 4th mark. Now they are asking you, why do you think that the GDP rose? So you see, GDP rose because of government spending. So what happens when government spending increases? So government is spending on infrastructure projects. As a result, the employment level rises. More of labor would be demanded. More of raw material would be demanded. Aggregate demand overall in the economy would rise. As a result, output would rise. So what would happen? The GDP will grow because more of goods and services would be produced. It could also be that GDP could rise because of an increase in the quality and the quantity of labor. How quality? If more is being spent on the education or the training of the labor, so what will happen? The labor would be having a higher rate of productivity. Per unit of input, more would be produced. As a result, more output of goods and services would be produced. The productive potential of the economy would rise. The entire PPC would shift upwards towards the right. As a result, GDP would rise. Or it could also be because of the quantity of labor. Maybe more people are now a part of the labor force. Unemployment fell. Or it could be immigration rose. So once the quantity of labor increases, again, what does it contribute to? It contributes to more production of goods and services, as a result leading to a rise in GDP. Or if you haven't written or chosen any of these two, third could be increase in investment. So what happens when firms invest more in the provision of capital goods? What does it do? It brings more goods and services. Remember, it contributes to more long-term development. So as a result, more output of goods and services is going to be produced. The productive potential of the economy is going to rise, and the entire PPC is going to shift upwards towards the right, causing a contribution in the output of goods and services, a rise in the contribution of goods and services. You remember the PPC? So what would happen? The entire PPC is going to shift outwards towards the right. So more of both type of goods, capital and consumer, would be produced in the economy. I hope you've understood. Moving forward, part C. Part C talks about an analyze question. Analyze why house prices may increase. So now it's a 6-mark question. What you got to do is you got to identify reasons and then you have to develop those cause and effect relationships in order to give a solid answer. So now they are asking you, why do you think house prices increased? So house prices might have increased because there was a fall in interest rates. So that means what? Consumers were able to get loans on soft terms. As a result, the demand for houses rose. So when the demand for houses rose, the prices for houses rose. It could also be that people were earning higher incomes. That means they were able to afford a house of their own. And since the standard of living rose, so the demand for houses rise, causing an increase in the prices of houses. Or it could be that initially maybe the government had imposed a certain minimum price, but now the government removes that price ceiling. As a result, prices rose. Or it could be maybe the government has imposed certain taxes on construction of houses, which has caused a surge in the price of houses. Or maybe it could be that the construction prices of the houses has risen. Construction prices for new houses, maybe the raw material now is expensive, or maybe now the labor is expensive. As a result, many of the factors of production behind the construction of houses have gotten expensive. That would be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices, and as a result, the prices of houses might rise. So you can write these points, expand on it, develop that cause and effect relationship, and you'll be able to get full 6 marks. Moving forward, part B. Part B is a discuss question. It's asking discuss whether an increase in government spending on education will lead to economic development. So now you've got to present an argument for both sides talking about what do you think? Will education contribute to more of economic development or not? And if yes and no, so you have to brush it off with a solid conclusion. Not necessarily, but I still recommend it. I think it shapes your answer. All right. Now, why do you think government spending would lead to economic development? What happens when government spends on infrastructure, or when government spends on training, or when government spends on the provision of public and medical goods? As a result, what happens? First, if the government spends on infrastructure projects, so what happens? Employment level rises and aggregate demand increases. So standard of living of people will rise because incomes are going to rise. And when more output and goods and services are going to be produced, the productivity is going to rise. People are going to enjoy more of goods and services. Standard of living is going to improve. Poverty level is going to fall. Income levels is going to rise. Overall output level will rise. Aggregate demand curve will shift upwards towards the right. People would have access to more goods and services, which means that the level of poverty would fall. So that means not only in absolute terms, but in relative terms as well. So not only people would be able to get their hands on the basic necessities of life, the gap between the rich and the poor would shrink and inequality would reduce. It could also be that if the government is providing more of training or it's providing education, so what would happen? People would be more skilled. There would be a better trained labor force, which would improve the mobility both in occupational and geographical terms of labor. Again, this would increase or help them avail those job opportunities which previously they weren't able to, and as a result, standard of living is rise and overall economic development is going to be witnessed, right? Plus higher income levels would mean that now we've got a more healthier labor force, again, which would contribute to a positive, healthy social well-being of the labor. And as a result, productivity is going to rise. So again, what would that mean? That more of output, more goods and services will be produced. And as a result, HDI statistics or HDI figures, Human Development Index, would improve. A higher life expectancy would be witnessed. A healthier population would be there, right? Plus, when the people are going to be a part of the labor force, overall the crime rate is going to reduce, and the labor force, since it's skilled and more trained, so innovation would further improve efficiency, reduce wastage, and contribute to productivity. However, it could be that maybe government spending is not that effective if it has a limited reach or if it caters or provides benefits to a certain part of the population. Then it would not be effective if there is a high level of corruption in the economy and the benefits are not reaped by all the sectors or all the sections of the society, then it would not be beneficial. Plus, government has an opportunity cost because the resources are scarce. So it could be that maybe uh, instead of spending on infrastructure, it could have spent elsewhere, right? And it could have been better off, maybe in improving the balance of payment deficit. Plus, it could be that maybe it's leading towards a brain drain. The highly educated population is not staying in the economy but is emigrating, or it could be that maybe it leads to higher taxation because in order to facilitate or finance increased government spending on economic development, the government would be heavily taxing people, and so that means that it might not be beneficial in true meanings, in true terms, right? So increasing government spending would be effective if long-run spending is matched with employment opportunities. All right, so that means that yes, you are providing training and you're looking after the labor force. Only it's going to be fruitful if you've got opportunities in order to give employment to the labor. All right, moving forward, question number 3. Question number 3 says Japan has significant periods of deflation. Now, deflation is a persistent fall in the level of inflation, right? So, inflation is falling. The rate of inflation is reducing consistently, persistently. Despite efforts to stimulate the economy through fiscal policy measures and monetary policy measures, economic growth remains slow. So now, even though the government has tried certain fiscal and monetary policy measures, but still economic growth is less. Some economies have argued that monetary policy used by the central bank is one of the causes of low productivity, and the critics say that monetary policy is the reason behind low productivity in Japan. Now, they are saying identify 2 fiscal policy measures. Now, we know fiscal policy is what? Taxes and government expenditure. So simply list them down and you'll get straight 2 marks. Part B. Part B says explain 2 influences on productivity. Now, what is productivity? More output per units of input. So now, what do you think could be affecting or contributing towards productivity? Education and skills, work environment, the amount of remuneration of works available to the employees, healthcare, facilities, technology. So now how would you explain them? 1 mark for the identification of the reason, 1 mark for the explanation, 3rd mark for the identification of the second reason, and the final 4th mark for the explanation of the second reason. So now you could say the more educated or the more trained the labor force is, the more productive it would be, right? The more efficient it would be, more output it would be contributing per unit of input. Why? Because it's trained, it's productive, right? Plus, if the working environment is highly productive, it's highly positive, so employees are going to be motivated and they are going to look forward towards their work and they are happily going to contribute towards the production of output of goods and services, right? Plus, if the remuneration are really attractive or the perks offered in jobs are convincing, lucrative, so productivity is going to increase. Or if the population is healthy and healthcare facilities are provided, so again a healthier workforce means that they are going to be productive and more output per unit of input is going to be there, less wastage, less absenteeism, more employment, less unemployed, right? Plus, if the technology is highly efficient, it's up to date. So what's going to happen? Faster, less wastage, easier, convenient. Like if you got robots or if you got assembly lines. So what would happen? Speedier, faster production, more innovative, less wastage, right? High quality output leading towards high productivity. I hope this is clear. Part C. Part C talks about analyze reasons why central banks are important for an economy. So now you've got to tell why do you think central banks are important for any economy. So now we are going to talk about the roles the central bank plays and why do you think without these rules an economy cannot survive. So firstly, central banks are responsible in order to carry the monetary policy of any economy. They are responsible for changing interest rates, for controlling inflation, for curbing demand for inflation or preventing deflation or influencing consumption or investment activities in any economy. They are responsible for the printing of currency and minting of coins. They influence exchange rates. They buy and sell currencies in order to set floating exchange rate. So if an exchange rate is, if the currency is appreciating and it does not want that, if a country is, of a currency is depreciating, so again it will buy and sell its currency in order to ensure that it remains between the exchange rate it tries to set. Further, a central bank is responsible in order to prevent the collapse of commercial banks. It's famously known as lender of the last resort. That means when commercial banks run out of liquidity and when they are short of funds, it's the central bank that intervenes and provides liquid assets to commercial banks. Plus, central bank oversees the entire financial system of any economy. It ensures that there remains confidence in the financial sector by regulating commercial banks and by ensuring that banks maintain sufficient reserves. Plus, they control the money supply and ensure price stability, thereby ensuring effective economic activity in the economy. We've written that straight 6 marks. Final part of this question. It's a discussed question again. It's an 8 marker. Again, you're going to represent both sides of the argument. Now, the question says discuss whether or not deflation is a problem for an economy. So, what is firstly deflation? Deflation is a persistent fall in the rate of inflation. It could be that yes, a persistent deflation is a problem for an economy. Like for instance, in this case, it was a problem for Japan because even though the government had been trying sufficient fiscal and monetary policy, yes, it was not able to stimulate economic growth. So what happens is if an economy or a country is experiencing persistent deflation, it causes a fall in the consumer confidence, it causes a fall in aggregate demand, and as a result, what happens is it leads towards recession because it leads towards a fall in the level of output, unemployment rises. When unemployment rises, people are deprived of the basic necessities, they get the poverty trap widens, the standard of living falls, and economic growth falls. Plus, what happens that although inflation is causing the level of prices to fall, yet it causes profitability for firms to fall. And as a result, firms would shrink their production activities. So overall, the output level would fall. And again, it would further cause a multiplier effect, causing an increase in unemployment, right? As a result, investment level would fall. So less people would be inclined to invest and people would take out their investment, reduce their investment, and it will lead to a fall in the business confidence. So entrepreneurs would not be willing to invest in economic activities. They would not expand, rather they would limit their operations. Plus, what would it do? It would increase the real value of debt. Houses and firms would face difficulties in their repayment of loans. However, it could be that maybe deflation is not a problem for an economy because falling prices would mean increase in availability, increase in purchasing power, more affordability of goods and services. If deflation is due to a fall in the cost of production, then it's not a concern because it would lead to an increase in productivity or it could cause an increase in improvement in technology due to which prices are falling and output is still rising. It could be that maybe the fall in prices is causing exports to get lucrative because exports would be cheap and this would be beneficial then. But deflation would be would is a concern if it is causing a fall in demand which is causing a fall in economic growth and it's leading towards an increase in unemployment. But if it is due to an increase in productivity or if it is due to a fall in costs, then it is not a problem. So it depends on how long it remains and what are the causes behind deflation. Then only we can say that whether or not deflation is a problem for that economy or not. I hope this is understood. Moving forward, question number 4. Question number 4 talks about Lanzarote. That's a Spanish island, was once an area with very high rates of poverty. So now what happened? However, the rise of tourism has reduced unemployment. So initially it was having poverty, but tourism helped reduce unemployment. The government is trying to attract more workers to the island by using non-wage factors. Now, Lanzarote's low taxes also attract workers to the island. Mobility of labor in the island has also increased. So now the government tried to reduce taxes. It tried to provide non-wage factors in order to stimulate employment, and labor mobility has also increased. Now, the first part, they're saying identify two non-wage factors affecting workers' choice of jobs. So non-wage factors mean other than wage, just other than salaries, what could be the motivating factor behind workers, right? Why would they be attracted towards jobs? So it could be the working environment. It could be what promotion or job or growth opportunities exist. It could be what level of job security there is. It could be the amount of perks being offered in the job. It could be how close the workplace is towards the house, near the house, where it is located, and are commutation routes available, how easily people or the workforce can commute to and fro from their workplace to home. Pick any two, write them down, and you get straight 2 marks. Moving forward, part B. Part B talks about explain how unemployment can lead to poverty. So now you've got to talk about how do you think rising unemployment is going to cause poverty. So now first mark for the identification of the reason, explanation, the second mark, third mark for the reason identification, the second, and explanation, full 4 marks. So now you could say that when people are unemployed, it leads to a falling income. As a result, they are not able to have access to the basic necessities of life. So that means it gives a rise to absolute poverty. Plus, what happens? People would also experience relative poverty because they would be earning little or no income at all because they will be unemployed. As a result, standard of living is going to fall. So the gap between the rich and poor is going to widen and relative poverty is going to increase. GDP per capita is going to fall. Plus, it could also be that when unemployment rises, what happens? Spending falls, right? So as a result, what happens? Because the income levels are falling, people are not earning more. So when spending falls, overall the tax revenue for the government falls, both in terms of direct and indirect taxes, right? So as a result, what happens when the government spending would fall because government would be having less revenue for their budget spending, right? So when government would be spending less on the provision of public and merit goods, again, this would what happen? It would lead further to poverty because then what happens? People would be not be better off, right? Then government would not be able to spend on unemployment benefits or for the provision of merit and public goods. It could also be that if unemployment persists in the long term, it could lead to loss of skills and which would further reduce the productivity level and it would hamper the mobility of the people. As a result, standard of living would further reduce and people would fall further into the poverty trap. All right, moving forward, part C. Part C talks about analyze influences on mobility of labor. So now what do you think are the factors that affect mobility of labor? So skills in education, higher the skills, higher the education, the more occupationally and geographically mobile the labor force would be, right? The easier it would be to get hold on good job opportunities and move towards the far-flung areas which they previously never looked forward to. The easier the government policies are, if it's easier for the workforce to move to other countries, if there are no visa restrictions, if language is not a barrier, if they provide you to bring your families to the working country, there are no restrictions, easy paperwork, so then the mobility of labor, occupational mobility would increase, geographical mobility would improve. If easy housing is available, the house prices are not high, and proximity to workplace, the housing is available again, so it's going to increase mobility of labor. Again, if transportation is easily accessible, proximity, easy access, closeness to the workplace, again, occupational mobility would improve. Geographical mobility would improve. Family ties, if you got less dependent, and so it would be easier for you to opt for jobs maybe which are far away from your house. So then it would not be a problem. So your mobility would improve. Again, if you are it's easy for you to work from home, flexible hours, go for online jobs, work from home, or if it's easier for you to adapt to different cultures, language is not a barrier, again, it would improve your mobility. All right, move forward, part B. Discuss whether or not low taxes are beneficial for an economy. So now, again, both sides of the argument. You see, when taxes are low, what happens? In disposable income increases. People are going to be able to have access to more goods and services. As a result, aggregate demand is going to increase. So when aggregate demand increases, it gives a signal to firms. They would expand their output. Overall economic growth would increase. When firms would expand, what would happen? They would be asking for more labor, employment level would rise. So what would happen? Incomes would increase, overall output level would increase, more output would be produced. So not only it would be available for the local population, it could also be available for exports. As a result, earnings would improve. And then firms can use the profits earned in research and development. Multinationals would be attracted when taxes are low. As a result, they would be employing the local labor force, unemployment would fall, standard of living would improve, people would be earning higher incomes, poverty level would reduce, efficiency would rise, and MNCs we know bring in technology, so innovation is going to improve, research and development is going to take place. However, it could be that maybe low taxes are not beneficial because when taxes are going to be low, the government revenue is going to fall because we know that indirect and direct taxes are a great source for budgets, right? That's how government gets its finance to spend on the provision of infrastructure and merit and public goods, right? That's a source of finance. So it could be that maybe it leads to a budget deficit and government would not be then able to provide infrastructure, strengthen infrastructure, and it could be that maybe it might not be meeting its targets for merit goods and for public goods, maybe education or healthcare, they would be compromising on it since taxes are low and would not be even then able to provide unemployment benefits. So as a result, what would happen? Then aggregate demand would fall because the government is not spending, so standard of living might fall and economic growth might reduce. PPC might shift inwards. And it could also be that income inequality rises. So you could say that yes, low taxes can boost economic growth and it can increase investment, but if the taxes are too low, it might reduce long-term development and reduce government spending. All right. Final question for today. Let's see the stimulus. This says street vendors mostly operate outside formal economy to avoid government regulation. Now, what do street vendors do? They are not part of the formal economy. What is the formal economy? In which business and economic activities are registered or they are regulated and monitored by the government. So obviously street vendors are not a part of the formal economy. They are not regulated or overseen by the government. They're not registered, right? However, many are now entering the formal economy, but now things have changed. This had led to more government revenue, increased productivity, and higher economic growth. Some governments plan to take measures to increase the number of firms in the economy, but now people are moving towards formal economy. Now, vendors are registering. Now, they are saying identify two reasons why workers may choose to work in the formal economy. So, now why do you think they are shifting? Maybe they want to be supported by minimum wage. Maybe by being a part of the formal economy, they are entitled to unemployment benefits, they get pensions, they have access to employment protection, and they are regulated by the government and they are under legal protection. So you can write any two reasons and you'll get straight 2 marks. Part B. Part B talks about explain two effects of economic growth on a country's population. So now again, you could say that since economy is growing, that means it is able to enjoy more goods and services. As a result, it leads to higher standard of living. People would be earning higher incomes. The poverty level would reduce and overall employment level would rise. It could also be that when economic growth is being witnessed, healthier workforce would be there. People would be having access to more healthcare facilities. That means productivity level would rise, more output per unit of input, plus life expectancy is going to improve, living standards is going to improve, the cost of production is going to fall. It could also be that when economic growth is witnessed, aggregate demand increases, more output of goods and services is being produced, and it could be that maybe prices might rise. It might lead to demand pull inflation, too much money chasing too few goods, or it could also be that maybe it might cause towards negative externalities. That means maybe too much of economic growth at an aggressive rate might cause depletion of natural resources or might contribute towards pollution, leading to an increase in negative externalities. Identify the reason, give an explanation, you get straight 4 marks. Part C talks about an analyze question, analyze how government regulation can reduce market failure. So now we are going to be talk about ways in which government intervenes and reduces market failure. We'll give examples. So government imposes minimum prices and maximum prices in order to address market failure. For instance, it could be imposing wages, minimum wages, in order to prevent manipulation, in order to prevent distortion by employers of employees. It could be putting in maximum prices, let's say for housing or for certain basic necessities, so that it's affordable and available within the reach of more and more population, right? So it could also be that government is providing public goods and merit goods, education and healthcare in order to improve the standard of living of its people. It's providing unemployment benefit, reducing poverty level. It's providing subsidies in order to promote the provision of certain goods and services, reducing the cost of production so that more goods and services are within the reach of the consumers. It's providing subsidies for innovation, or maybe in order to reduce the level of unemployment, it's imposing taxes on the consumption of demerit goods such as alcohol or cigarettes in order to ensure a healthier population, or it's imposing taxes on imported goods in order to address balance of payment deficit or reduce income disparity, right? Maybe it's imposing progressive taxes in order to shrink the differences between higher income and lower income groups. All right, so you identify the reason, develop the chain and link analysis, and you'll get straight 6 marks. Last part D, talks about discuss whether or not an increase in the number of firms will be benefiting an economy. So now what do you think? More firms would be beneficial or not? So you see, when more firms are a part of an economy, so what happens? Overall, the level of competition increases. So what happens? More goods and services will be produced, more output of goods and services. As a result, the employment level would rise, unemployment would fall, a higher variety of goods, more substitutes. So maybe prices are competitive, affordable, leading towards higher goods and services. Economic growth is going to be witnessed, unemployment is going to be falling, standard of living is going to be improving, income levels would rise, quality of goods might improve, prices might fall, leading towards an increase in exports. Exports are going to get competitive, government is going to be enjoying a higher revenue, balance of deficit might shrink or might go into a surplus. As a result, it could also be when there are too many firms, the monopoly situation is going to reduce. So the power of the monopolistic firms is going to fall. However, it could be that maybe too much firms might be leading towards negative externalities or might be leading towards duplication, right? It might cause waste of resources or maybe profit levels might fall, right? So as a result, then investment would fall, businesses would not be encouraged, it would cause a fall in research and development, and it might be that since too many firms, they are not operating on a large level, so economies of scale might not be achieved, right? They might not be able to enjoy the advantage of lower average cost, which larger firms could. So you could say that more funds would be beneficial for an economy if fair competition and efficient allocation of resources are there. I hope you understood and enjoyed solving this paper with me. Stay tuned, subscribe, happy learning. I'll be back with more such questions.